Okay, right. I don't know if this has worked terribly well, but I'm going to try it. Okay, let's try this. Can you see the screen? It's not showing. No, it isn't. I'm going to sound a bit weird because I'm recording, so just bear with me. Okay, right. What I'm going to try and do is go through the 2026 Lower 6 exam question, the Tempest extract question to the Tempest question 1. Right, and I'm going to try and show the ways that I would approach this question. Now, the advantage of this is that you can tick off the things that you did do, and you can think and then annotate and add to what you haven't done, so that you've got the idea of how you would do this again next time. It's going to take about 20 minutes, bear with me on this one. Okay, how would I start this? I would always go to, where does this come? This is Act 2 of a comedy. So I might say 2 or 3 things about what's just happened before. This scene is in contrast to the rather serious usurpation scene that Antonio and Sebastian had previously. So it's a contrast of comedy, lightens the mood somewhat. Act 2s are usually about the division of 2 sides, and we perhaps see that Caliban and Trinculo are going to be one side against Prospero as well. Act 2 is also about loss of identity, and that's covered in this extract. So I might just say 1 or 2 things contextualising the scene before going into the extract, so you can think about that. Okay, many of you talked about the stage direction. Caliban comes in with a burden of wood, so he's in the role of slave, okay, which contrasts with Ferdinand later on when he does it willingly. There's also the noise of thunder. Some people talk about how it gives the sense that Prospero is ever present, overlooking events in this scene. Now, the really strong students talked about how Caliban is, we get a different point of view about Caliban in this scene in Act 2. Previously, Caliban's been seen as a beast, potential rapist, and we don't, you know, we're not sympathetic to him perhaps, but maybe Shakespeare shifts our attention as an audience to be sympathetic to him. He speaks in verse, you would have talked about that. So again, it questions the role of hierarchy in this. Caliban talks about, he puts forward a curse. He wants to curse Prospero. All of the infections of the island he wants to place upon Prospero. We're reminded of earlier in the play, says, you taught me language and I learnt how to curse. So you might, talking about connections is a way of you showing off your knowledge of the play as a whole. All the infections, Caliban is taking his knowledge of the island, the bogs, the fens, the flats, this tricolon or triplet, to fall on Prospero this curse. So we see his anger here. But then we find out that he's more sinned against than sinning, to use another Shakespeare term. So he says, and yet I must curse. Why? Because this is what his spirits do to me. They verbs, pinch me. They fright me, verbs. They pitch me in the mire, in the mud. They lead me in the dark, unless he bid them. So Prospero does all these things to Caliban, and they punish me for all of these little trifles, for every small thing they set upon me. So in a sense, we're looking at our view of Caliban changes. He's very much seen in a more sympathetic light. They do chatter me, they shout at me, like monkeys and apes. They bite me. So all these spirits, like hedgehogs, they pinch me, and they do prick at my footfall. A-star students will group words together. So when you get your work back, you might be taught, maybe try and group things together. So you would look at all those verbs of how Caliban is punished by Prospero. And then sometimes am I wound with adders? And I get the suggestion here, like a little connotation of hell, adders and snakes with cloven tongues. This idea of the devil speaks with cloven tongues do hiss me into madness. Maybe this questions, who is the devil here? Is it Prospero, perhaps? Okay. Some people talked about a little part of that speech. Not many people talked about holistically all of it. So that's some things, when you see a big chunk of someone's speech, think about that. Trinculo enters, right? Caliban thinks it's a spirit come to torment me. So again, we've got mistaken identity throughout this extract, which is typical of comedy. Well done if you talked about that. He's going to punish me for bringing in the wood slowly. So again, we get even another sense of how unjust Prospero is to Caliban. I'll hide from him. Right. Then we go to Trinculo. Not many people talked about Trinculo's language as well as they could. One of the things that we notice is Trinculo speaks in prose. One way of noticing prose is it just looks like words in a book, right? Whereas Caliban's verse is much more like poetry set out. Just one thing I would say about verse. How would you identify verse? Well, it's 10-syllable lines, more or less, but also there's going to be imagery in there. Not many people talked about imagery. So we get, and his spirits like hedgehogs which lie tumbling my barefoot way, mount their pricks. So we've got simile in there. The infection that the sun sucks up, metaphor. You might talk about that, okay? Okay, Trinculo talks in other ways, but I'm going to show some things I would say about Trinculo. Trinculo's talking about the weather. There's a storm brewing, he says. I hear it sing in the wind. Again, the idea of music in the play, you could make a connection with the role of music. And again, how we get the sense that Prospero's leading everything. If I was to say something about how Trinculo describes the weather, look at some of the things I point out here. That big cloud, he says, is about to shed his liquor. I see here the shroud till the dregs. I will stay here until the dregs of the storm passed. These are words to do with alcohol, dregs, liquor, and maybe there's one more. There's maybe one more, shed his liquor. I can't remember. But again, he uses the metaphor of alcohol to describe the oncoming storm, which is interesting because he's also drunk. Then we've got mistaken identity again. Typical of comedy, slapstick comedy and humour. You've got to think about how Shakespeare's given his audience entertainment, in contrast to the serious scene that just came before it. Is this a man or a fish? Questions. Dead or alive? Are they rhetorical questions? Perhaps they are. You can say that. But question, confusion. What is this? He smells like a fish. He has a fish-like smell, a kind of not of the newest. Poor John, i.e. he's stale. So we've got 3 references to his smell. Again, for comic purposes, to heighten the comedy, to emphasize the repetition is comic. So think about that, right? By the way, this is how you spell repetition. People spell it wrong. Okay, bear with me. Many of you talked about Were I in England Now? Many Shakespeare subplots, you have to talk about this being the subplot scene, and the role of subplots is in many ways to give a commentary on London life as well. Were I in England Now? It plays on the themes of the play. He says, if I had a piece, were I in England, and I had this fish painted, there would give a piece of silver, there this monster would make any man rich. This strange beast, they will not give they won't give a penny to a beggar, but they will lay out 10 to see an Indian or an unusual person in their eyes, someone they haven't seen before. Again, the idea of making profit from a man is being used here. You would talk about that and how we see that elsewhere in the play. The idea that he's called a strange beast. Everyone in the play dehumanizes Caliban, and you would say how this links to elsewhere. Connections prove your knowledge of the play. Okay, so try and find connections with elsewhere. Prospero calls him a beast. Moon calf, all of this. So, mistaken identity. Again, is this a man or a beast? He has fins like arms. I think this might be an islander, he says at the end, who suffered from a thunderbolt. Again, the thunder comes in and he has to hide. And we have the comic line of misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows. So again, look out for where there might be a laugh from an audience. Okay. Speaks in prose. Shakespeare's making us question the idea of the noble savage, perhaps. Who is the savage? Is it Caliban, or is it the man who tries to use someone else for money? So maybe we're made to question that. So one of the most important things in this scene is how the audience are coming to see Caliban is different to how we've seen him in Act 1. Okay, that's important. Right, I turn over the page. Enter Stefano with a bottle in his hand, singing. The role of song should be explored in The Tempest. There's 4 things that songs does. In many ways, it's a means of control. In many ways, it's to signify magic. But here, the song is used for comic purposes. He's singing a song about going to sea. How do we know it's a song, a scurvy tune to sing at a man's funeral? And then he says, here's my comfort. He drinks. Alcohol is his comfort. But it's also a means of control in this play because they give alcohol to Caliban later. Alcohol makes people into clowns, so it's comic. How do we know he's singing a song about the sea? Where are the clues that this is a song about the sea?
At the beginning it says the master, the boatswain, the swabber.
The master, the swabber, someone who cleans the boat, the boatswain or bosun, the gunner, the mate. What kind of words are these? These are concrete nouns. So, grouping words together, he's singing a song about the sea. Now, all of these men, they loved Mal, Meg, and Marion, and Marjorie. Adoration towards women. The representation of women should be explored here. But none of us like Kate. Why did we not like Kate? And this is a song in which things rhyme. She had a tongue with a tang, so it had a bad smell. She would say to sailors, go hang, rhyming couplets. She loved not the savour of tar or pitch. Tar, you don't know what this is, and pitch. These are the things that sort of kept boats together. Like they sealed a boat, tar and pitch, right? She didn't like sailors. Who did Kate like? Yet a tailor might scratch her where she did itch. Again, there's a kind of sexual innuendo that's supposed to get a laugh. Now, so she gave it up for tailors, maybe because they gave her clothes. She didn't like sailors. Now, no one really talks about this song in the sense that you can make a connection with the representation of other women. So, for instance, The sexual innuendo that she might have sex with a tailor is in contrast to I am a maid, right? Miranda. So Miranda's virginity and her maidenhood is in contrast to the song about Kate. So the representations of women. So you can look at something in the scene and compare it to something else to show your knowledge of how Shakespeare uses parallels and opposites. Yeah. All the way through. So here the song is really for comic purposes because it's a drunken song with a bawdy, drunken joke at the end of it. And she says, then to sea, boys, and let her go hang. They don't care for Kate because Kate doesn't care for them. And even comments this is a scurvy tune, but here's my comfort, he drinks again. So alcohol is used in a comic way in this scene. Now this is also comic because Caliban has mistaken identity again. He thinks it's a spirit. He thinks Stefano is a spirit. Who else sees somebody and thinks that they've seen a spirit in the play? Ferdinand, very good. Ferdinand thinks when he sees Miranda, is she a spirit? Miranda thinks the same. Does he breathe? So again, can you see connections? I always put a link there, like the link in a chain, right? Connections. That shows your knowledge of the play by looking at a scene in this. Okay, Stefano says, what devils do we have here? This link with devils makes us question, who is the devil in the play? Is it Prospero, perhaps? Is it Caliban? Who puts tricks upon us with savages and men of India? So again, the idea of being tricked by some devil. Maybe Prospero's tricked other people like devils. Again, the idea this man has 4 legs. Again, mistaken identity. That's about it. While all the time, Caliban says the same thing. The spirits torment me. Oh. So there's comedy from mistaken identity. Typical of a comedy. So you have to get in your idea of knowing what comedies are about, mistaken identity, slapstick humour, and how it relates to the play. Stefano's last lines, people didn't talk about them. Here is a monster of the island. Who else calls Caliban a monster? Everyone calls Caliban a monster. He has got an ague, an illness. So the extract ends with Stefano saying that Caliban has a disease, an ague, whereas the scene started with Caliban wishing to put an infection on Prospero. Sometimes thinking about how an extract is both begins and ends is quite useful. So this must be some monster with a disease. Where the devil should he learn our language? So again, we're reminded of, I took pains to teach you language. You did but gabble before, says Miranda. So the idea of language has been something in the play that we've talked about. You could talk about that. Or Caliban, you taught me language and I learned how to curse. So the extract ends with this other reference to language. Now in many ways, language is a weapon of control, as is alcohol. So the scene begins and ends on this reference to language. Now, Stefano says he's got a disease, this poor 4-legged thing. I shall give him some relief. Zach, what relief will he give him? Alcohol. He's going to give him alcohol. And as we know, alcohol is a weapon of control as well in this. Now, if I can recover this beast and keep him tame, again, the idea of the word tame, if I can keep the adjective tame, again, the idea of treating him like an animal, if I get him to Naples, he's a present for any emperor. Again, Here's another man exploiting Caliban. The extract ends on the exploitation of Caliban. Who else has exploited him? Well, Trinculo wants to. Prospero wants to, or does. And at the end of the play, we see Antonio and Sebastian also say the same thing. So we can talk about the end of the scene. Right. So we can talk about how the end of the scene, again, reinforces the theme of how outsiders like Caliban are treated and exploited by others. Okay. You don't have to go into lots of different interpretations. You're just highlighting things in the extract. So you're looking at how many things I've highlighted here. You should be quoting a lot from the extract. You should be talking about metaphor, simile, triplets. Okay. Usually in a speech where a character goes from thinking about one thing to another, you'll get a break. So here, there's an exclamation mark. He goes wanting to curse Prospero, and then we get a caesura in which there's a change in thought. This is what he does to me. This is what I want to do to him. Caesura, in the middle of the line, this is what he does to me. Okay? So you can break up speeches sometimes. Look at where they're about one thing and then where they're about something else. So we end that speech with some sympathy, maybe some empathy for Caliban. We have to talk about the audience in this extract. I hope you've used the word audience correctly and spelt it right. There endeth my video on how to answer this question. Okay, as we know, Stefano goes on to give him alcohol, and that alcohol is a method of trying to keep him worshipping Stefano. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. I now stop sharing. And stop recording. Stop.